Hey guys, it's Kat and Boogie. Boogie. Yeah, funny. I'm doing a foundation wear test today. So I think last month I talked about that I've got like 3 foundations that I want to do wear tests on, and I asked people in the comments what they wanted to see first, and I found that the majority of people said they wanted to see the Benefit Hello Happy Flawless Brightening Foundation wear test. So that's what I'm doing today. I also have the Hello Happy Velvet Powder Foundation. So I have put this all over my face. I've put this on one side and a normal powder on the other side. So yeah, I do want to see if this makes a huge difference or if it sort of just acts like a normal powder. So we'll find that out later on. But I'll give some basic information about these foundations first, and then I'll talk about my skin and we'll get on to the application. All right, so let's start with the Flawless Brightening Foundation. So it's in the Hello Happy range. Last year they brought out the Hello Happy Soft Blur Foundation, which was more of a sort of like BB cream type product. It was a lighter coverage. And I did do a review on it and I didn't love it. I haven't used it since, I don't believe. It just felt like it sort of sat on the skin, didn't really do much. The colors were a bit off. So because I didn't like that last foundation, which was a light coverage, weird foundation, I didn't quite get the point of it. It sort of seemed like you needed perfect skin for it to look good. And then if you had perfect skin, you didn't need it. So I was sort of a little bit intrigued when I heard that they were bringing out more of a medium coverage foundation, more of a traditional foundation. So I did want to try it, and luckily I sent it in PR along with this powder. Now, they sent me the shade 3, which I think is probably the closest match for me, but the shade range is pretty poor. I'll talk about that a bit later, and I've got the shade 2 in the powder. All right, the claims of this liquid foundation is that it's supposed to give you a brighter, hydrated, flawless looking complexion. It's got medium coverage. It feels lightweight, looks natural, and is virtually undetectable on the skin. It does say it's got photochromic pigments that instantly adapt to brighten skin in any lighting, natural or artificial. It's got flower acids to help boost radiance and hyaluronic acid to attract moisture to the skin's surface to help maintain hydration. They also say this is 12-hour long wear and a natural satin finish. So I will be wearing this for 12 hours to see if it does last 12 hours. Usually I find that on my oily combination skin, since my oils do tend to break down foundation pretty vigorously, anything that says it's going to last 12 hours lasts like 6 to 8 hours on me, and anything that says it's going to last 24 hours lasts 12 hours. So we'll see. All right, now on to the claims of the powder foundation. So this is the Velvet Powder Foundation. What sort of irks me a little bit about this is that it costs the same amount as the liquid. So this contains 7 grams of product. The liquid contains 30 mils. And in Australia, they're both 52 Australian dollars, which is pretty pricey for a powder foundation in my opinion. So just that alone would make me not buy this, but I was sent this, so I am going to tell you what I think about it. Now, I don't know if you can see properly. I have used it a couple of times. It did have a little nice face on it that has worn down, which is sad. Goodbye, little face, but I'll read the claims. Okay, so they say that you can choose your coverage with this buildable, velvety smooth powder foundation. It's lightweight and breathable. It mattifies all day, yet feels creamy soft with shea butter extracts known to create a luxuriously smooth feel. It's got a mirrored compact and it contains 2 custom applicators, a brush and a sponge. So it's supposed to have 12-hour wear and a natural matte finish. And I believe the reason that they have the sponge and the brush, which I don't like, I would have actually preferred just a lot more product. Like if you gave me something like 15 grams of product, I would prefer that over these things that are in the bottom. So you open it up, you have the mirrored compact, and then underneath you have a sponge applicator and a little brush applicator. Now, I believe the reason they have both is if you want a higher coverage, you use the sponge, and if you want a lower coverage, you use the brush. Now, I don't like these little things. I find them finicky. If you're in a pinch and this is in your handbag, sure, it could be handy, but everyday makeup, I feel like that's just bulky and annoying. So those are the claims of both the foundations. They each come in 12 shades. And I want to say, even though they've done a smart thing of dividing the shades evenly throughout light, medium, and deep tones, I want to say it's just not enough. So I would say that this shade is probably the closest match for me. but I don't like the undertone to it. It's very, very yellow. So I feel like even though they might have the tone that will match a lot of people, people do vary a lot in undertones. You know, you can have pink undertones, yellow undertones, neutral undertones, olive undertones. And this range is pretty much disregarding all the undertones and just giving you a yellow sort of golden tone. So it will work on some people and not work on other people. So yeah, I don't really love that. And Benefit's not known for being the most inclusive with their shade ranges. So like they had one bronzer for the longest time until they added some new ones in. I actually think it'd be a lot more successful if they held off and released a warm, neutral and cool undertone to each of the shades rather than just say, oh, we're going up in incremental sort of steps in depth, and if it doesn't work, deal with it. So yeah, I just didn't think this was the smartest move, and I think that's going to be a big limitation to a lot of people wanting to try this, is that they just won't find the shade that will match them. Now, I understood a little bit with their previous Hello Happy foundation because it was such a light coverage. Sort of one shade can sort of color adjust and work on a lot of people because it added barely any coverage. But with something that says it's a medium coverage foundation, you need to match it a little bit better than what they're offering. All right, before I get on to application, I want to tell you a little bit about my skin. Because I think what people like from foundations and how foundations wear really depend on what your skin's like and your body chemistry. So I have 33-year-old skin. I do have a few issues with like sort of creasing. I also have quite oily skin, mainly in the T-zone. It's currently winter in Australia, so I'm not going to be sweating this off. I'm not at peak oil production mode because it is winter, but I do tend to get like an oily T-zone, especially on my chin and around my nose and probably in here. Like foundation, unless it's really, really, really long wearing or oil absorbing, it just loses the plot. So I'm sort of expecting that. Around the rest of my face is pretty normal. And I also have issues with sort of like redness. So on camera, it looks a lot worse than in real life, but I do have little patchy bits of redness on my cheeks. So I look for something with enough coverage to cover all of that. I also would like my foundation to ideally last 8 hours without a touch-up, and then with a touch-up, 12 plus hours. So we'll see how this one goes. All right, let's cut to me applying the foundation. All right, so it's 9:03 a.m. So I'm going to try to wear this for 12 hours, and I'm going to apply the foundation onto bare skin. I have used my skincare. I put it on about half an hour ago. God, my skin looks so blotchy on camera. I swear to God, in person, just looking in a mirror, I'm like, it looks quite healthy and nice. On camera, everything looks blotchy and horrible. But I am going to apply this foundation with a sponge that Benefit released. This looks quite big because I've hydrated it. So it did fit in this container before. So yeah, it does get quite large. But this is the first time I'm using this sponge, and it's a very strange sponge, I must say. So this is a beauty blender that's old. It's been hydrated, but it sort of like bounces back. It's like a foam, whereas this is like marshmallowy. Hang on, I'll turn down the brightness a bit so you can see it properly. But you kind of squidge it and it sort of stays in place for a while. So it's very, very dense. I think that might help with stopping product absorption, but it's very strange. So this one's a bit stained, but yeah, it kind of bounces back straight away. This one just kind of goes, bleh. It's like memory foam. That's what this reminds me of. So I have put about 2.5 pumps on the back of my hand, but I have used this foundation a couple of times. I haven't used this with this sponge, so I'm curious to see how it goes. But with other sponges and brushes, it takes a lot of product to spread around your face. Similar to when I did a review of the Beauty Blender foundation, I just found that took like 6 pumps to do my entire face, and this one is similar. I did squeeze out the excess of the water in this sponge, and I squeezed it into like a tea towel, but I'm finding because it's so dense, it's holding a lot of water and it's applying this sort of wet and a lot more sheer than I'm used to. So I think this application method is a little bit different. I'm going to go in with another 2 pumps. So this is about 4.5 pumps so far. So this color isn't too bad for me. It's a little bit yellow though. I think the sort of depth of color is fine, but the tone is just a little bit yellow. But the coverage is really nice. It's applying really evenly when you actually get the coverage on your face. So because this color is a little bit yellow for me, I am going to take it down my neck with another 1/2 pump. So I've used in total 5 pumps. So I think the effect of this looks a lot nicer in person than it does on camera. I just feel like splotchiness and redness really is amplified on camera. But this looks really even. It almost looks a little bit hydrating. I don't know if it's just the wetness from the sponge that's still drying, but my skin looks quite healthy and really even. So it hasn't blocked out everything, but it's covered redness really well, and it's covered most things. Like I will go in with a bit of concealer just around my nose a little bit and under my eyes because that's what I do. But I'm also going to show you powdering my face because I'm going to use half a face using the Hello Happy Velvet Powder Foundation. So because I will show powdering, I'm just using a little bit of concealer. This is my Maybelline Age Rewind in the shade medium, and I'm just putting a little bit on the sponge. I'm just going to put that under my eyes a little bit and just around my nose a little bit, which is an oily area for me, and I get a lot of redness. So the concealer and the foundation has worked in really nicely together, which is nice to see. Generally that's the case, but some concealers and some foundations just clash and sort of ball up. So I'm going to show you powdering because I want to use their powder foundation. This shade's a bit light. This is in the shade 2. It did have a little face on it, if you can see, but I've used it a couple of times. So this is a little bit light. The foundation I'm wearing is 3, but I want to apply this to half my face and then a normal powder to the other half and see if it makes a difference in the wearing. So I'm just going to apply a little bit. I don't want to apply too much because I know this does add a bit of coverage. That's the whole point of it. But since I do market that you can use them separately or together, I sort of want to try them both. And this does set the makeup really well. I sort of wouldn't expect anything different from something that is designed to be paired. So that's just taken that shine down and really set it so it's nice and touch dry. It doesn't feel like it's transferring at all. This side is still quite dewy. It still feels like it's set, but it has a dewy look to it. So now for the other side, I'm just going to use the other side of the brush, and I'm going to use just my Mecca Max. This is the banana powder. It's just a pressed powder. The main reason I'm using it is partly because the color is very similar and also because it's in my project pan. So I have been using this quite a lot. So I'm going to pick up quite a lot of it on the back of my brush, and I'm just going to set my makeup. All right, so that one set it really nicely too. It feels really nice and set and really nice and soft. This one doesn't feel as powdery. So the foundation side, this one feels a little bit more powdery. And I definitely think this side has a little bit more coverage. I'm not sure if you can see too much, but you can see a little bit of redness here and you see a little bit, but less. It just looks like slightly more coverage on this side compared to this side, but they both look quite good. So I don't feel like you necessarily need to pair this foundation powder with it to make it work. It looks good just with a normal powder. Another difference that I've seen is I think this side blurs pores a little bit better than this side. I can see that the powder has sort of skimmed over some of the pores and almost emphasized them. So around here and around my nose. All right, so I'm gonna go off and do my makeup and I'll be back to discuss the foundation. All right, so I'm back with makeup on and hopefully you can see that both sides look really nice. I do think, once again, this side looks less coverage. This side almost looks flawless. It looks really smooth. There are some pores, so I'm not sure if you can see them, but there's a little bit of visible pores there. I think it's like the powder sort of skipping over the skin, so you do need to sort of like maybe stipple the powder in a little bit, but everything works really well. The bronzer and the blush sitting really nicely over the makeup. I didn't put highlighter because I want to see when sort of the shine starts coming through, but I'm really happy with the way it looks. I think it looks a lot nicer in person than it does on camera, but it does look quite nice on camera. And I think the only issue is maybe it is oxidized a little bit. So my neck, and you can't really see this on camera, but I can definitely see it in person. It's looking a little bit more orange than I believe it did when I first applied it. So just be aware of that. All right, so I thought I'll just touch on how I feel about this foundation and whether it meets the claims. Firstly, I do think it is a medium coverage. It doesn't cover everything, so it's not a high coverage, not a full coverage, but it definitely covers most sins. It covered the redness pretty well, but you can still see things peeking through, so it is a nice amount of coverage. It's definitely a medium coverage. I do think the finish is pretty accurate as well. So this does seem like a natural satin finish. If you do powder it, it will go more matte. If you don't powder it, it will be a little bit less matte. And I do think it's quite hydrating. So when I showed you applying it before I powdered, you could see that there was a bit of hydration to it. It did feel set, but you could definitely see there was some moisture to it. And this does definitely feel very lightweight. Like I touch my face and it just feels normal. I don't feel like I'm wearing a lot of foundation. So I would definitely agree with that. I did wear this in a video last week, my Colourpop orange video, and when I first put it on, it looked fine compared to my neck, but then as the day progressed, I could tell that it was oxidizing, and the distinction between my face and my neck was quite crazy. So I do think that these colors run quite yellow, and they also oxidize to look a little bit more yellow. So I just think the shade range isn't quite there, and if you really like this formula, you would have to get color adjusting drops to sort of tweak it to match you exactly, which is a little bit frustrating. I do think it feels really, really nice, and I think it looks really nice on the skin, so it might be worth it, but yeah, we'll see at the end of the day. All right, so I thought I'd check in. It's just about the 3.5 hour mark, and I just noticed that there is a little bit of oxidization, so it's getting a little bit darker as the day goes on. So this is the third lightest shade. So if you are in between a shade, I'd probably go a shade down because chances are it might get a little bit darker. It's not too much, but it's definitely a little bit darker than it was when I first applied it. I've also noticed that my chin has started getting oily, and around my nose has already started getting oily. So for me, seeing oil at like the 3.5 hour mark is not a good sign. It's a little bit concerning because that looks quite oily. I'll zoom in. So I'm not too sure if you can see, but in the crease in my nose, there is oil on both sides and chin is quite oily. The rest of it's looking really nice though, quite flawless, but there are just little hot spots of oil starting. All right, so the time is 4:05 in the afternoon. So this has been on for about 7 hours now, and I want to say it has just started getting really oily in the last hour. It's a really cold day, so I wasn't expecting this, but to be fair, I have been sitting in a heated room while I've just been doing some editing. So maybe it's the heater that's doing this. I'm really surprised. The main reason I'm really surprised is because I have actually tried this foundation probably about 4 times before using it today, and it has not done this before. And that's why I do like to try the foundation a few times before actually doing these wear tests, so I have an idea of what is a typical way that it wears and what is a little bit unusual, like this. So this is particularly shiny, and like my chin, it looks so oily, it's ridiculous. I don't think I've had a foundation look that oily at this stage for the longest time. And around my nose, there's just a pool. So it's at the point where it's starting to break down the makeup because it just can't hold the oil. So I need to touch up. For this to actually wear longer and for me to be comfortable with it, I have to touch it up and I have to blot it. Now, usually I use blotting sheets, but I can't find any right now. So I've just got a tissue and I'm just going to blot away some of the oil. I've just torn the tissue into 2 thinner parts. Just gonna blot my forehead. So there was just so much oil there that I thought that if I just powder over it, it's just gonna cake up into like a powdery, oily paste. So if you do have oily skin, you really have to remove the oil. And if you don't have a blotting sheet handy, just tear a tissue into 2 parts and just gently remove the oil because there was too much oil. Now, if I wanted to refresh my foundation perfectly, I would go in with a little bit of concealer, but because I don't really care that much, I'm just gonna go in with a little bit more powder. So I'm using just the Mecca Max powder that I used on this side because I don't want to add too much more coverage. I just want to sort of set that into place so it doesn't move any further. So I have removed a lot of foundation on my chin. Once again, if I wanted that to look quite perfect, I'd go in with a little bit more concealer, but I'm just going to re-powder this. But to be fair, the rest of the face still looks really nice. It was just the really oily areas that just couldn't handle it right now. And it is quite unusual because, like I said, I have worn this a few times and it hasn't done that. So I think it's sitting in my office with heating that did it. But if you are an oily skin person, the oil is going to break through, but you can blot it off and sort of fix it quite easily. Like I'm I'm happy with this now. I'm happy to continue going on, but I really wanted to show you the oil at the 7-hour mark, which was too much oil. All right, so it is 9:20 p.m. So I've had this on for over 12 hours and it's not looking great. So I have gone back to an oil slick pretty much everywhere from maybe cheekbones inwards is just very oily. It's pretty gross. And I did, blot and touch up slightly at the 7-hour mark. So, I didn't expect this to last 12 hours, but I also didn't expect it to last this badly because when I have worn this previously, hasn't looked like this. Now, I don't know if it's different today because I'm wearing it for 12 hours, whereas normally I try not to wear makeup for 12 hours these days. So maybe I was just wearing it for 8 hours and I was like, this is wearing fine. Or it could be that I was working behind my computer most of the day in a heated sort of office and that may have exacerbated the oil production. I'm not too sure, but this is definitely a lot worse than the past days that I've worn it. So what does that mean? I don't know. That just means that this foundation is a little bit inconsistent across days. And if you do have oily skin, it's definitely not going to last 12 hours on you. And you will get oily at the 6 to 7 hour mark, if not earlier. You might be oilier than me. So this might be one that you have to babysit a little bit. I do have to say though, that even though this is ridiculously oily, it is staying together. Some foundations on me will start to become very patchy and break apart. This is still looking like I've got a nice layer of foundation on. It's just a very, very greasy layer of foundation. And I'm sure that if I touch it, it's just gonna smear because it's literally just oil on my face. All right, some of the pros are that I really like the look of this on the skin. I think it looks nice and even. It applies really nicely with a sponge. I didn't really like the Benefit sponge. I still think like this has been ages and it still feels like it's sort of marshmallowy. It just absorbs a lot of, holds a lot of water and it's weird. I like it with a sponge. I think it's a nice foundation. It does apply quite smoothly. It's very lightweight. You don't feel like you've got much product on. I don't have dry skin, but I do feel like this was slightly more hydrating than other foundations. So yeah, I like the coverage. It covered all sort of like uneven skin tone, but it also made your skin look fairly natural. So I really did like the look of it on the skin. Cons to this is that it doesn't last as long as it says it's going to last, and if you've got oily skin, you're going to break through with oil. Even if you touch up, it's still going to break through at the 12-hour mark, so it definitely doesn't last 12 hours, and it's probably like a decent foundation, like a short-term foundation for oily skin, but not an all-day foundation for oily skin. It does slightly oxidize. I found that after you've put it on and maybe worn it for an hour or so, it does deepen in color slightly. So if you're in between a shade, maybe look at testing it out and seeing how it sort of settles on your skin, because you might want to go a shade down. But I did notice that throughout the day and with my oil production, it didn't oxidize any further, because some foundations, as it breaks down with oils, it gets darker and darker and darker. This didn't seem to do that. I do think the shade range is really, really limiting, and you might be able to find a shade that matches your sort of the depth of your skin tone, but not the undertones. I also think that they do market it to be worn sort of with the powder foundation, so it's made to be used individually or together, and I just noticed that end of the day, didn't make a difference if you set it with the powder foundation, which is also 52 Australian dollars, or if you set it with just a basic pressed powder or loose powder, it all works the same. I will come back to this in a later video because I think it's better on its own than layered over this, but the only noticeable difference that I could tell layering it over this foundation is adds a smidge more coverage. Last con, so there definitely sounds like there's quite a few cons. I found that you do tend to use quite a lot of product to cover your face. So yeah, it's just one of those foundations. Maybe the pump is small, maybe it just doesn't spread as easily. I'm not too sure, but I found myself having to use anywhere from 4 to 5 pumps to cover my face, whereas other foundations I might use too. So I just feel like this, I'll probably go through this pretty quickly. All right, so in saying all of that and having the cons definitely seem to be outweighing the pros, what do I think about this foundation? And surprisingly, I don't hate it, which sounds very, very strange because I'm sitting here looking like someone's just thrown a bucket of oil on my head. But I've just had a good time with using this because it makes my skin look really nice. And if I am going to just wear it on the weekend to catch up with friends, it's a really easy foundation to throw on, and it generally does look quite nice. I was actually really surprised how it wore so badly today. So whether this is just a really temperamental foundation that sometimes wears well and sometimes wears badly, I'm not too sure. Maybe I just had a wrong combination of like elements today that this didn't like. But if you're wanting a consistent foundation that will work for you all the time, this is probably not going to be it if you've got oily skin like me. But I will definitely finish this bottle because I like the finish, and I can see myself if I'm going, catching up with family for a couple of hours or seeing friends for lunch on the weekend. This is a really beautiful foundation that I'd be happily reaching for. It's just not one that I would rely on for a full 12-hour wear because it just doesn't look good. And even if I did retouch this again, I don't think there's any saving it. At this point, you'd probably blot off all the makeup and have to reapply it again. So yeah, it's not the best for oily skin, but it is a very pretty foundation. All right, so that was a surprising one for me. I thought this was going to be a walk in the park. It was going to be a really nice foundation, and it wasn't. So, oh well. But I do like it a lot better than that first Hello Happy foundation that, yeah, I didn't get the point of that. Anyway, if you enjoyed this, give it a thumbs up. If you do want to see me do a quick makeup look using this, let me know and I'll get onto that very shortly. See you guys.